This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas.
Good morning, true seekers and true crime junkies. Welcome back to another episode of Hit the Road Jack, Finding the Zodiac. We are going to bring up the presentation right now. At this point, I just want to cover some things from last week, and then we'll get right into the show. I'm extremely excited. We're going to be covering more of the Zodiac communications and murders that are happening at this time. Last week, we were talking about some of the spacing issues or some of the consistencies between letters, and in doing so, I was discussing this with Terry B., who's been on the show before. He had noticed some of the images that I had for the John Benet Ramsey note were not what he believed them to be. So we took a look and did a comparison of the images that we both had, and I found that he had extremely great images. And as we can see here, what he was focused on was that letter Z in the John Benet Ramsey note. And of course, this is the image that he gave me from the letters that he has. And you can see how that compares in quality to what I have. We see some distinct differences, obviously, in the form, which I don't necessarily know that that means that anything was altered as much as it's just a bad generational copy, and it's not picking up a lot of the minute form that I've been looking for. So I'm glad to be able to say now I will be working off of a very good quality version of this letter, and we will pick up that handwriting examination and comparison in 1996 when we get to JBR. But while I was doing that, and of course he focused in on the word pickup from JBR, we had the pick off that came from both the Zodiac and the Atlanta, Georgia child killer. And so when I lined those up, I just wanted to kind of see how everything fell. Now, between the Zodiac and the Atlanta, Georgia child killer, we can see that the spacing and alignment of the words pick off are exactly the same. I was blown away when I put these up underneath each other just to kind of get an idea and see how things fell. We do know that the Zodiac had a hard right slant. That may also be due to the use of drugs and other things that were occurring at that point. And we know that the Atlanta, Georgia child killer did more of that shaky style writing that we saw in the John Benet Ramsey note, which was more controlled, obviously. But I also noticed this form here that in this O that you see is actually a form we're going to see in the Gall and Sharp letters. So it's almost as if he carries images even in the way he forms letters from one communication to the next. Either way, I want to welcome Nolan Del Campo to the show this morning again. Hi there.
Hi.
Good morning. So excited to be jumping into the Zodiac stuff again.
I am as well.
We are going to actually, I've been communicating by email with a gal named Moonlight, and she has been tracing the homicide victims or unidentified bodies of victims and trying to make connections between those and murders that have occurred throughout the state of California as it pertains to the Zodiac Killer. She's more interested in the hitchhiker murders, but I see that she's kind of getting involved with all kinds of stuff. So I just threw this up here because obviously 63 through 69 has already passed. So I'm going to have to go back and take a look. I do not have these people, I believe, in the presentation and see how those murders occurred. What struck me odd when I looked at it, though, is that we had Monterey, Santa Cruz, And there's actually a couple from the Monterey area that's in this list. And those were murders that I had not been able to attribute to Sandy Bent's murder map, which she found in her mailbox in the late 80s at some point in time. And it had an arrow drawing down. So the map was really more of the Bay Area, Sacramento area. He had arrows pointing off to Sacramento and how many people he'd killed in that direction. He also had arrows pointed down to Santa Cruz, and he had claimed four victims by way of placing a star there. So if we are to perceive that this murder map is in fact from the Zodiac Killer who was taunting Sandy Betts, it led me to believe there were 4 unaccounted murders in the Santa Cruz area. And now we actually see some of those murders on this list. So I will be getting back to see how those tie in, what the happenstances were of those murders, and we'll catch up on that research at another time. And I will continue on in 1970 with researching Patricia Ann King, because that is in fact back in the Bay Area.
Santa Cruz, Santa Clara, and Monterey are all pretty close together. And
right.
Another thing, though, a name I'm not seeing on that list is Donna Lass.
That's because these are unsolved or victims that are found, and unsolved murders. And then she's trying to relate, like the one that says unidentified dead on 7/6/69. They don't know who that victim is, but we do have missing girls that have gone missing. So she's trying to like link these missing people with these unidentified remains.
No, okay.
Right? Always interesting, everybody's take on how they go about visiting these cases. So basically we have on August 4th of 1969, we had what's called Lompoc Jane Doe. So this is the first murder after the letters from the Zodiac claiming the initial 4 victims in the Bay Area. Lompoc, I was not shocked to see, was actually right next to Vandenberg Space Force Base, which we know that in the Dominguez murders, the lot number on the shells that were found that they were killed with traced back to Vandenberg Air Force Base. So I thought that
PX there,
right,
that's when we purchased, yeah, the ammo and the Domingos Edwards, yeah.
Yes, and evidently, let's see. So she was just over 5 feet tall and 125 pounds, shoulder length brown hair. She is still unidentified to my knowledge. That was dyed a reddish blonde. She was wearing sandals, a blue blouse, and homemade white pants decorated with a blue floral print. One witness placed her at Gaviota State Beach days before her murder. And we see Gaviota down here. And there is some other cases in this presentation that are in Gaviota. So we're going to see that area more than once. She was stabbed at least 15 times and her throat had been slit. So that's definitely, as we've seen so far, some of the crimes that have been included have included cutting the neck, such as Sherry Jo Bates. She was found near a quarry, so I always have either a waterway dump, a quarry dump, train station dumps, things like this. So the quarry dump also tied in. So I pulled this one in. She was dumped down an embankment near Highway 1, close to the Vandenberg Space Force Base. Now, I already talked about Dominguez and Edwards there, and it looks like we had some pathologist, Dr. Robert Failing was the person who had done the autopsy on her, and he was a retired forensic pathologist who'd done the autopsy on Jane Doe, mentioned the case and how the girl aged somewhere in her mid to late teens or perhaps a few years older, but had protruding buck teeth and 19 fairly recently filled cavities. So that Dr. Failing thought should have sparked public attention, but there were no reports of a missing person fitting the description. And I would think that's rather odd. I'm not sure what you think, Nolan, but if you've had recent dental work, then you're obviously not some vagrant. You're not homeless. You're not, hopping from place to place, especially if you had as many as 19 cavities done.
That's amazing. 19 cavities.
Well, maybe she didn't have good oral hygiene during her, early years, but at some point made it to the dentist and got everything corrected at one time. You'd have thought this would have thrown up some flags somewhere as far as her identification was concerned. But to this date, she is still unidentified.
That's wild.
Right. Now, in the Zodiac Killer search query in the FBI FOIA vault, I was running, like I do with each one of these cases, I look to see what the FBI has on them. And when I pull that search query, I look to see also what that brings up, because sometimes there's connections back and forth. We can clearly see here that the Zodiac Killer runs to part 4 of 6 and then jumps straight into the Atlanta child murders. Like I'm saying, that communication is extremely consistent. He takes credit for the Zodiac crimes. We just saw the lineup of the word pick off as it referred to the kiddies on the school bus. So I do think there is a direct connection, but it was not a shock to see that that was included in this search query when I ran Zodiac Killer. There's also the Bramer kidnapping, which continually comes up, though I'm not sure he's involved with it. The insane clown posse. I'm very interested in seeing what that's about if I ever have some time.
They're frightening.
Are they?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't care for clowns at all.
Yeah, and their followers are frightening as well.
Really?
Their fans, yeah.
So we got kind of a little cult going on there, huh?
Yeah, yeah.
It also listed Jonestown, D.B. Cooper. Not a shock. Again, we're going to talk about how those letters fit in. We've already seen the handwriting. But it did go on, and it also brought in Richard Ramirez, and there was Jonestown again. So I just thought that was interesting. And the next letter we're going to pick up with on the Zodiac case will actually make everyone question Michael Mageau's accounts. If we remember correctly, he was the only one that I think put the age of the Zodiac in the area of around 26 or in the 20s somewhere. And then fingered Arthur Lee Allen, sorry guys, at a later date, in which case he looked nothing like any of the other descriptions and was obviously quite a bit older than 20-something at that time. So he erroneously fingered Arthur Lee Allen, and after reading the Zodiac's letter, I was convinced that Michael Mageau probably was just attempting to do his best to help, but he probably did not really see what was going on with the person who was his attacker. All right, so this is it's the 4th letter, but it is the 2nd letter in the series, because the first 3 were actually a 3-part that said pretty much the same thing, containing that cipher that was broken by the Hardens. This letter is written again, Dear Editor, this is the Zodiac speaking. In answer to your asking for more details about the good times I have had in Vallejo, I shall be happy to supply even more material. By the way, are the police having a good time with the code? If not, tell them to cheer up. When they do crack it, they will have me. On the 4th of July, I did not open the car door. The window was rolled down already. The boy was originally sitting in the front seat, so now he's talking about Mike Mageau, when I began firing. When I fired the first shot at his head, he leaped backwards at the same time, thus spoiling my aim. He ended up on the back seat, then the floor in the back, thrashing out very violently with his legs. That's how I shot him in the knee. I didn't leave the crime or the scene of the killing with squealing tires and racing engine as described in the Vallejo paper. I drove away quite slowly so as not to draw attention to my car. The man who told the police that my car was brown was a Negro about 40 to 45, rather shabbily dressed. I was at this phone booth having some fun with the Vallejo cops when he was walking by. When I hung the phone up, the damn, and of course spelled incorrectly, expletive thing began to ring, and that drew his attention to me and my car. Last Christmas in that episode, the police were wondering as to how I could shoot and hit my victims in the dark. They did not openly state this, but implied this by saying it was a well-lit night and I could see the silhouettes on the horizon. Bullshit. I'm sorry. That, I know, right? He's mad. Bullshit. That area is surrounded by high hills and trees. What I did was tape a small pencil flashlight to the barrel of my gun. If you notice in the center of the beam of light, if you aim it at a wall or ceiling, you will see a black or dark spot in the center of the circle of light, approximately 3 to 6 inches across. When taped to a gun barrel, the bullet will strike exactly in the center of the black dot in the light. All I had to do was spray them as if it was a water hose, and there was no need to use the gun sights. I was not happy to see that I did not get front page cover or coverage. He likes to break his words up. And then it's signed off, no address. So this is the first time that he indicates that he is the Zodiac. And this letter is shown to be written on August 7th of 1969. Just I think a day or so before the Hardens actually crack his code. So he's wondering whether or not they had a good time with it. Now, I see that in Dennis's book that he wrote in there, Mike Mageau survived but did not get a good look at his attacker because the attacker shined a flashlight in their face. And that brings me to the whole concept of Mike Mageau's initial statements where he stated that he saw a profile of the killer. If you have a flashlight that's being shined in your eyes, how is it that you saw a profile of anything?
Right, and he would have been looking straight at his face because he would have been aiming the gun forward, so he would have been looking forward. He wouldn't have been sideways.
Exactly. There's some definite questionability there in regards to what he thinks he saw. Now, Mike Mageau's statement is that he saw the suspect from the side profile, but the Zodiac says he has this flashlight on him. So how did he see anything? And then Mike Mageau says that he seen the suspect in his own car by the car accessory light when the Zodiac went to get into it. Yet the Zodiac says that he was down in the back seat on the floorboard. Now, I don't know who in their right mind would want to get up and put their face into a window to look for their killer to see what that person's doing. So I really wonder if he actually was able to take a glance at the killer at that time either.
No, I think he was flailing his feet and legs to deflect bullets to protect like his head and torso. And
well, and if he's down on the floorboard, what are the chances? I mean, most people would probably, if they had any sense at all, try to play dead after being shot.
Yeah. And another curious thing about Mageau, in Grace Smith's book, Zodiac Unmasked, he says Mageau was wearing multiple layers of clothing that night.
Correct. Almost as if he knew something was going to happen.
Yes.
Or he was trying to make himself look beefier. Either way.
It was, yeah. Well, was it like 4th of July, though?
What's that?
Didn't that happen on 4th of July?
4th of July, I believe, was Blue Rock Springs. That was the first one. And then Christmas was the second murders, which were Lake Herman Road.
Okay. So that was Christmas. Okay. My bad.
That's okay. That's okay. And of course, this is addressed to the editor. We're going to see that this is a running theme with pretty much everything. We even seen it all the way back into the Black Dahlia. I mean, he definitely was writing the press along with the police department and sometimes the victim's family. He's talking about fun that he's had, and fun is a theme that runs throughout all of these particular communications. I'll point them out when it occurs. He will supply more proof about the crime. So it's really important that they take him serious. He wants them to know that he is the person that perpetrated them. He has the letter E addition error, which is intentionally left behind on line 9 and 18. And I have those here. So on line 9, we have the E that's here in having, and we have these large spaces on both sides of the E. So we see that the HAV is actually quite close to each other. The E has a nice space, and then before the ING is another nice space. That tells me the person stopped, slowed down their writing in order to perpetrate that spelling error to make it appear as though they were either illiterate or uneducated. Either way, I find that it is the way that it keeps happening. Even if we look down here into 18 again, we see the FIR has a natural spacing between both of them, and then we see quite a generous space between the R and the E and the E and the I. So once again, I find that these were more or less just planted attempts at misspelling versus real true spelling errors. Let's see. Okay, so he has a reference to crack it. And where did we see that? Right here. So to cheer up, when they do crack it, they will have me. Well, crack becomes one of those themes that the Zodiac continues to use. He's crack proof. You can't crack me kind of thing. And then in Black Dahlia, one of his letters or cutout letters where he used a magazine to create that communication. He actually wrote in it, Dahlia's murderer cracking. So I wanted everybody to see that crack is definitely crack is the theme.
Crack kills.
Crack kills. Hyphenation is used here where clearly there's enough room to complete the words. I pointed that out because all we had was an ED that ended up on this next line, but clearly the size of that hyphen that was used at the end of end would have provided enough space for him to do the ED. So it's almost as if that was either some type of a ruse, or if you believe Harriet Suchet, then that might be a tip-off point for some type of code, like read between here and there type thing. The watermark that's found on the paper is Fifth Avenue, which is the watermark of the F.W. Woolworth Company in the Woolworth Building from New York, New York. Slide 305, murder of Mary Pinchot Meyer in New York in 1964 could be where the Zodiac picked up this watermark paper. So I look around at where these papers are coming from, but he always seems to choose quality paper.
I'm pretty sure Mary Meyer was killed in D.C.
Right.
She was one of JFK's mistresses.
Oh,
and the former wife of a high-ranking CIA official, Cord Meyer.
Exactly. Yes. I think we've already covered that one. And maybe, maybe I just need to make a small correction there. I don't know why. Well, so maybe while he was in New York getting the paper, I'm thinking that this murder was also committed. So DC is not too far off, obviously, from where he would be if he was in New York. And we do know that there was active MK Ultra going on in New York as well. So that this could be a stopping point or a briefing point, or, someplace that the Zodiac Killer stopped at while he was committing other crimes, because we do have a series of murders that were actually in New York as well. I had this written down as received on August 4th. Obviously, that's incorrect. The law enforcement log shows that it was August 7th, 69, that it was sent. So it would have been received at some point after the 7th. The reference to having fun. Let's see here. The letter E spelling errors are found on line 3 and 11 of the second page. Notice the large spacing before and after. This would suggest that the author had to think about the letter he placed to deceive. Natural handwriting would not single out that particular letter in certain words unless it was intentional. So reference to calling into the police shortly after the crime and almost getting caught is definitely what occurred with Sherry Jo Bates as well. There's the confession letter where the suspect says that he did call into the police as confirmation that the letter was from him. The Zodiac trait is to make contact when someone has said something wrong, and in Jack's eyes, or when they are giving too much interest to a suspect for one of his crimes. In line 23 through 25 of this letter, it shows that the Zodiac was mad and that they portrayed him as something other than a professional killer, or I would say, what is that? A bad sport. So basically they were making it sound as though he wasn't as good as he was, and he needed to let them know that he was better. Line 5 uses the hyper fussy construction so as not to draw attention. So that so as is not necessary, but he includes it. So it's that hyper fussy construction that the linguistics professor from UC Davis talked about when he did the linguistics on the Zodiac and Jack. And an attempt to sound intelligent. Jack was very intelligent, but I think his people skills and ability to articulate things in a manner that complemented his education and knowledge-based capabilities is where he lacked. So he tried to sound important, which was all about ego.
Yes, that's a theme that runs throughout the Zodiac communications.
Right. The rather, the perhaps, the consternation. He uses some rather large words to be making little spelling errors like that letter E.
Especially when he feels the media or the police are trying to make him seem not intelligent. Then he gets kind of mad.
Exactly. Yeah, well, and I think after the statement by Brian Hartnell, where he indicated that the person was not illiterate but not well educated, he wanted to say, wait a minute, you're now challenging my ego. when he said that the area that he had shot Majot in was covered by high hills and trees, he's absolutely right. Lake Herman Road, the area where this murders happened, was absolutely surrounded. When you're standing in it, you feel like you're in a small bubble. You have hills and trees all around you. You really can't see anything outside of that. So I think he was probably correct when he stated that he wasn't doing it by the horizon or by moonlight. The Zodiac goes on to give specifics to prove once again that it was him and to explain the electric gun site that he speaks about in a future letter. Other than the typical spelling errors and prove it to you statement, the most intriguing aspect of this letter is the signature no address. It wasn't until months into this investigation that I realized Jack was giving his location, which at this time was literally nowhere. He did not have an address, and he was said to be living out of a converted bus he got from his sister and brother-in-law. In Dennis Kaufman's book, he again refers to this flashlight because he knows that Jack, as an avid hunter, said that Jack was a hunter and there was plenty of land around there to hunt. He would take me with him sometimes. I remember when we went at night, he would mount a flashlight on top of his gun. You could see eyes from animals at night with the flashlight. Then you would just aim right between them. In 1974, Zodiac mailed at least 3 letters, and they were mailed from the Bay Area. And at that time, it says they were living near Placerville. So I had kind of mapped this out early on when I took a look at the murders. It seemed that Jack's hunting radius was approximately 2 hours from wherever he might be at that particular hour and a half to 2 hours. Of course, that was the outlying areas where we would find bodies that were dumped or bodies that were or people that were kidnapped. I don't need to really go over all of the spelling errors with everybody, but we do note that there is the letter E and then there is the double letter. And that double letter spelling error could either be the absence of the second letter that should have required 2, or the inclusion of 2 letters, like in the word already we saw in that particular letter, was spelled A-L-L-R-E-A-D-Y. So those are some of the things that we'll see going on here. In one line, he'll spell the word correctly. In the next line of the communication, he will misspell it. So again, that may very well be a ruse as well. And I have not seen the envelope to this, so I do not have any idea what that looks like.
You know, on the no address, that's really weird. Can we go back to that for just a second?
Yeah. Okay,
the slant is way different. There's a big gap between the no and the address. And look at the second D. It looks nothing like the first D.
Again, that's that double letter spelling error. I think that he omitted that second D at first and then went back and placed it in, realizing he had misspelled it. So I think that the double letter spelling error might viably be a real, or again, he's just on drugs and his brain is going faster than his hand is capable of writing, and he's already on to the R before he's done with the D's.
It looks like he did go back later and add the D.
Yeah. Here was just the actual FOIA file from the Federal Bureau of Investigation talking about the 5th Avenue and Woolworth relation of the watermarked paper that was used in that communication, which is actually different, is a different type of paper than we're going to continue to see that he uses further on in these communications. On August 8th, we see that the Hardens solved this. We've already talked about what the solve was, and we've covered what that worked out to. They solved everything but the last 18 symbols on that particular cipher. And the Navy and the FBI failed to break it in a week's worth of effort. So it kind of shocks me. How is it that the Navy and the FBI failed to crack something that some history teachers crack? I'm either saying they solved it already and already knew what it said and wasn't releasing it, or they are not the smartest cookies in the bunch. I don't get it.
I think the former. I think they probably knew. They just didn't want the public to know.
Right? Yeah, it's a pretty, I like killing people like as a sport. That's kind of a, that's kind of a horrendous thing for people to hear. Definitely meant that there was going to be more. That's for sure.
Yes.
Ooh, I like, oh, okay. So that brings us to the Tate murders and the Manson family members. Now, of course, I do not believe that the Zodiac was involved with the actual murders of these individuals, since we do know who committed these crimes and they have been imprisoned for pretty much all of their lives. I did a little bit of reading and found that one of them is likely coming up. They've been approved for parole, but it hasn't been granted as of yet. And that was one of the females that was involved.
That's Leslie Van Houten, and the appellate court just overturned Newsom's veto of her parole. A few months back, the parole board actually recommended that she be released, but Newsom vetoed that for political reasons. He doesn't want to be the one, that goes down on record as letting one of the Manson people get out. So he vetoed it, but the appellate court overturned his veto. So we'll see what happens. He can appeal to the Supreme Court on that, but we'll see what happens. But I think she's going to get out.
Right. I mean, I thought the whole premise here is could she possibly be a danger to anyone else? And at her age, it's probably not likely. I mean, she's going to struggle pretty hard with just getting back into society, and she's going to be fairly busy with trying to regroup a life, I would think. Right.
She was 19 at the time of the murders. She went along reluctantly. She wasn't involved in the Tate murder. She was involved in the La Bianca murders. But the whole issue of the main narrative on both sets of murders that was told by Susan Atkins to fellow inmates in jail at Sybil Brand in Los Angeles, that's being called into question by this 2016 book Chaos that I'm reading right now, that it may not be the truth. What do you mean? Narrative of how the murders went down.
And why?
Why? Because the prosecution, Bugliosi, mainly, had a whole theory set up. Helter Skelter was his theory. The race war, blah, blah, blah. They did the murders to start a race war. And they went down the way that Susan Atkins said they went down. But this particular book says there's a lot more going on than Susan Atkins' version. And Bugliosi kind of molded her words into fit his theory.
Gotcha.
So it's an open question as to how it all went down.
I kind of wondered. Obviously, these are some very rich, influential people. We're talking about Polanski here, right? I mean, it was a good chance or a good opportunity that these could have been purposeful hits, not necessarily just right. And that's why it made the presentation, because it didn't feel to me to be like some, rabid person that's just out there running amok and decided to pick these people out. You'd have to know where they lived. You'd have to know the layout. Like there would have to be things that you would need to know by getting in there. And I also read that the Manson family was occupying Spawn Ranch, which was a major movie making piece of property. So very, very tied into Hollyweird and all of the stuff that we talk about that goes along with this.
Well, Terry Melcher was the former resident of 1005 Cielo, which is where the Tates, or Polanski and Tate lived. Polanski, of course, was in Europe, and and he kept delaying his return. Meanwhile, Sharon Tate's pregnant, about to pop the baby. Yeah,
right.
And so he wasn't around when it went down conveniently, and he had a lot of ties with, like he did Rosemary's Baby, and a lot of the Satanists and occultists hated him for that. And there's a lot of weird stuff going down. There's movies being made, parties, drugs, all kinds of crazy stuff. And the resident of that house was Terry Melcher, who's Doris Day's son, who's a producer in Hollywood. And Melcher was recording and going to produce an album by Manson.
That's very strange.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and there's evidence that Melcher, even after the murders, still maintained his contacts with Manson, knowing that Manson and his people were involved.
Wow.
So it's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah.
You can read this book.
Yeah. It's so the webs they weave, boy.
Yeah.
All right. So let's see. Oh, I just found it interesting. There was somebody called Charles Tex Watson, only because in the Oh gosh. And one of the murders back during the Black Dahlia time, it was called the red lipstick murders, but one of the bodies had text actually written in lipstick on it. And we know that it seems that the Zodiac was good about planting evidence that pointed towards a patsy. So I had wondered if Jack was familiar with these people as well.
Well, Tex Watson was allegedly the main killer in the Tate LaBianca murders. He was the one that shot Steve Prant, the kid in the car that was outside in the driveway, the first one that was killed at the Sharon Tate house.
Oh, so he was chomping at the bit to kill. Yeah,
and Tex Watson, actually, he was from Texas. That's why he was a football player and track athlete, and he was the leader of the Manson people that went to the Tate house the night of the murders.
So it wasn't even Manson that was the leader, but he got hemmed up for
Manson
being the leader.
didn't go to the house. Well,
right.
Allegedly he went there after the murders.
Oh.
But also there's a guy named Reed Whitson that is affiliated with the CIA that claims to have been at the house after the murders as well.
Huh. Doesn't surprise me.
In between the time the people were killed and the time that the maid found the bodies and called the police.
Wow. And then they knew that it was occurring. They knew that it was happening to have been able to show up before the police was even called.
Well, Sharon Tate's personal photographer, a guy named Hatami, he sounds Asian, but he's actually Iranian, I think. He received a call from Reed Whitson saying that the murders that occurred, this was prior to the time the maid discovered the bodies.
So how
did Reed Whitson know? So
right,
unless he was there,
right,
and he's the guy with ties to the CIA. Yeah. It's crazy.
Well, and then that leads to this next letter, which I thought was rather out of place, and it was postmarked on August 10th. So we know that the Hardens have already solved this, and it has been released in the newspapers at least by what did I say? August 8th. Yeah, so by August 8th, the Hardens had solved it. You know, this was all over the newspapers by that time. And for whatever reason, the killer decides to write in a letter with a code key, which actually just blows my mind. And we know he's watching the media. We know he's watching the news, what's being reported on him. If it had already been solved, what would the sense be? And immediately following the Tate murders, what would the sense be to actually write in a letter giving a code key to a cipher that has already been solved? So that's my biggest question.
Yeah,
right?
That time parallel is that's weird. It's eerie.
It makes me feel like he wrote this letter to make it appear as though, and I feel like in some cases he commits a murder to make it look like he's in one state, then he's off to another state committing a murder, but because this murder is being committed back here in California, it makes it appear as though he's still here in California and that this must be an unrelated crime. And that's how this letter kind of makes me feel, coming in a day after the Tate murders, 2 days after it's already been solved. What, has he been out of town? He hasn't seen the news. He doesn't know that it's already been solved and they already know what the code key is. I have no idea. Anyways,
also,
you right. Go ahead.
I was going to say, Manson wasn't even at Spawn Ranch or in LA in the days prior to the first, the Tate murders. He was up in Big Sur at the Esalen Institute doing whatever, trying to sell his music and hobnob with rich people. And then he met a teenage girl, and they came down back to the Spawn Ranch the day before the murders started. So
he wasn't even there trying to get everybody hyped up.
Yeah, it's not like this was plotted out. It was a sophisticated plan. It was kind of a spur of the moment thing.
Spur of the moment, or
maybe someone else was planning it and they just waited for him to get back to spring it.
Right. And maybe he became the patsy. And he obviously seems a little off his rocker, but I don't understand why he would take culpability. I mean, didn't he literally give or I don't know. I've seen a couple people saying DB Cooper, where the guy he was one of Bruce Smith's first suspect, and he refused to answer in the affirmative or to the negative of being D.B. Cooper, and because of that, the media vilified him as if he was the perpetrator. So I'm wondering if Manson wasn't that same type of personality where he would not answer in the affirmative or the negative and just continued to play this ruse because he was getting so much attention, not knowing what it was really going to do to his entire life.
Also, one of Manson's biggest things being a lifelong, or half his life he spent in institutions, criminal institutions as a boy and as an adult. One of the main things is that you don't want to be, if you're that type of person, is a snitch.
Right.
But at the same time, there's evidence that either he or someone in the family was an informant for the FBI and for the LAPD. And the LAPD, LA sheriffs, FBI, and CIA all were working together during this time period. Goes back even, it predates even the RFK assassination, and it continued up until like the 90s.
Well, like some of the senators' daughters that were killed, it appeared that that occurred to kind of try and control that individual. This could have been some attempt at controlling Polanski.
Perhaps, yeah. A lot of people, a lot of people think Polanski knew more than he's letting on to.
Yeah, I would have to say so. This letter, anyways, is mailed to Sergeant John Lynch of the Vallejo Police Department in Vallejo, California. It says, "I hope the enclosed key, in quotes, will prove to be beneficial to you in connection with the cipher letter writer. Working puzzles, cryptograms, and word puzzles is one of my pleasures. Please forgive the absence of my signature or name, as I do not wish to have my name in the papers, and it could be mentioned by a slip of the tongue. With best wishes, concerned citizen." Again, we show over here to the right that enclosed herewith in an envelope bearing the postmark San Francisco, California on 8/10 of 69. Basically, they talk about this particular letter and the enclosed key. I know that in the Zodiac series, we're going to see a lot to do with the word key. It comes up multiple times, including the finale letter with Tim Miller. We'll talk about that, but I really just wanted to point out that he is enjoying these puzzles, cryptograms, and word puzzles. And this is why Harriet Suchet had gone off into the cryptogram and the word puzzle, or the anagramming of particular letters, because this is the system that Jack taught Dennis and that Dennis conveyed to Harriet. Now, we know that the FBI is using the U.S. Navy radio station's cryptographic unit to cipher these codes. Per this intel that we just looked at for October 1st of 1969 at Skaggs Island near Vallejo, California. In a conversation that I just had with Moonlight, she had mentioned that there was some type of underground radio type facility on Mare Island. And when I conveyed to her this information about the U.S. Navy radio station, the cryptographic unit being on Skaggs Island, she said that that was on Highway 37 near Mare Island. And we do have a lot of crimes that we'll talk about around Highway 37, that strip from Vallejo to Novato. We had what was Blood Alley, basically a lot of accidents created there. And those could have been accidents, obviously, that the Zodiac didn't take credit for, but stated that he would make them look like accidents.
Then if you take a right at Lakeville Road and head up through Petaluma towards Santa Rosa, there was lots of other unsolved murders up that way.
Yes, and that's what Moonlight is basically involved with, which is the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders. So it's right in her realm, in her league. But she was the one that had told me about the underground radio station at Mare Island. And then when I found that this was a U.S. Navy radio station on Skaggs Island near Vallejo, that's all relatively close in proximity and right where Jack would have been, especially with all of his capabilities.
Yeah, that's not far from Berryessa either, or Vallejo.
No, exactly. Yeah, Vallejo, that stretch of 37. And he also was at Hamilton Air Force Base, which was off of 37 out past, I think, Novato. So all of that is related to Jack in proximity.
Yes.
All right. So this letter was addressed similar to that of the Black Dahlia. We can take a look at that again, where he spells out the word department, when we know that department could be could be condensed or could be abbreviated. Jack was not good with abbreviations, and nor was the Zodiac Killer. So we'd either see him spell the state out completely, or at least the first 3 to 4, 5 letters of the state, versus actually using like a capital C, capital A for California. He would write capital CALIF. So this spelling out of the entire word department is consistent with Black Dahlia and Anthrax letters, where he actually writes out the whole word building rather than abbreviating it. The letter addressed to Dear Sergeant John Lynch, cross-connect that to the Dear Melvin letter and Dear Draft Board letter from March 4th, 1968. A key is enclosed, just like the 1990 Christmas card by the Zodiac with the snowman. There's cross references to the Oakland County child murder, where a set of postal keys are included. Jack has 2 other keys that relate directly to areas where he has committed other serial killings, in my opinion. This also cross-references the September 18th, 2005 letter to Tim Miller, where the author alludes to a key to his identity. As I mentioned previously, key is an MO in these communications. Working puzzles, cryptograms, and word puzzles is one of my pleasures. Is the My Name Is cipher on April 20th, 1970, where Lauren Swearingham has applied an anagrammed and highlights the word game method to decoding it. Jack taught this system to Dennis Kaufman, and he showed it to Harriet Suchet, who came up with something similar as a solve. My pleasures is a reference to fun. Absence of my signature is like his Guess Who philosophy that goes on. And slip of the tongue seems like a mob statement, but I think that's also a Navy statement they used to make back in the day, if I'm correct. Do you know anything about that?
What statement is that? What statement?
That's slip of a tongue.
I'm not sure. I do have family members that were in the Navy, but I'm not sure.
I remember seeing one that said loose lips sink ships. So I think that that was just some type of, because the Navy was probably so heavily in ciphering and coding and all of that stuff, that everything must be, kept close to the hip type thing. But slip of the tongue seemed to me to be like a mob statement or something close to that. But it is to accidentally say that you were thinking, and to say what you were thinking instead of what you intended to say. So closely related to an earlier term, slip of the pen. Now, sign off with best wishes. Similar sign off in the December 27th, 1974 Donna Last Christmas card, best wishes. Author identifies himself as a concerned citizen, which is a direct reference to the May 8th, 1974 Zodiac Citizen letter to the San Francisco Chronicle, referencing the Badlands movie, which is signed a citizen. Patricia Houts was signed a fellow student, and the Zodiac SLA letter was signed a friend. Also note the use of lowercase letters in the sign-off, where proper words should be capitalized, which would include the Dear Draft Board letter, March 4th, 1968, where the author signs off signed, and that is a lowercase s as well, with a question mark, which is again kind of like the Guess Who. Working puzzles, cryptograms, and word puzzles is the Zodiac is now saying that cryptograms and word puzzles are what we should expect, in my eyes. Now, I did not see this letter actually pop up on the suspected Zodiac correspondence list in the FOIA files. It should have been placed right here between the August 7th letter of no address and the 1013 letter that we're coming up on that was in regards to Paul Stein. So I was kind of shocked to not see it in this list. I do not know why it did not make this list. But again, like I said, that coming up with a code key after the fact is like saying something in hindsight, which wasn't necessary. And really, again, just still boggles me as to why the suspect felt the need to write that letter and what the purpose of it was. Oh boy, we actually made it to Lake Berryessa, you guys, and we've got about 2 minutes here. We're here. We did it. September 27th, 1969, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard are attacked at Lake Berryessa. The let's see, first time the Zodiac appears in a hood that has the Zodiac sign sewn into it. Now, keep in mind, we talked about the Texarkana months and months ago, but the Texarkana also wore a hood at his crimes, which was basically kind of like a burlap sack as well. And we know that the juke fabric that was found in the hood that Dennis used is kind of like a burlap sack type of material. He stabs to death Cecilia Shepard, and I had her listed at or at least I think when we talked about Sherry Jo Bates, I was under the impression that she was a student at the community college in Riverside, but it turns out she's actually at the university in Riverside. But we do know that there's still a connection between Cecilia Shepard's sister, who attended a Bates event in Riverside. So we know that there's still some type of connection here between these individuals, even though that they went to two different schools in the Riverside area.
Brian Hurtnell is now an attorney in Riverside.
Right. Oh, we are at 7 minutes and 50, or we are at 7:50, you guys. This means that we are done. We're going to pick back up next week with the Lake Berryessa murders. I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. Thank you, Nolan, for being here today. It was a blast. And we will see you next Friday if you'd like.
Oh, love to.
Absolutely. Awesome. You have a great day and a great weekend as well. Thank you, everybody. Too.